Okay, Chairman, we're now live. If I can just hand back to you.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a virtual meeting of tonight's Corporate Services, Commerce and Communities Policy Overview Committee of the London Borough of Hillingdon. This virtual meeting is also being broadcast simultaneously on the Council's YouTube channel, which is Hillingdon London. My name is Councillor Richard Mills and I'm chairman of this meeting. A key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within our remit and hold in-depth reviews of topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the Council's decision-making cabinet. For those of you present during the meeting and intending to speak, please note that this will be filmed and any statements that you do make will be recorded and made public. Just some online housekeeping for everyone present before we start. I'm grateful if you could keep any mobile phones or devices around you on silent. If you are wearing a headset, ensure that your microphone is away from your mouth to avoid as much interference and noise as possible. When not speaking, please keep your microphone muted and then remember to unmute yourself when speaking. In order for the meeting to flow, if only we could have one person speaking at a time, and as chairman, I will call on those to speak. I will allow you a supplementary question before moving to another member to ensure that all those wishing to speak have equal opportunity. Before we do move on to the agenda, I'd like to do a roll call of all the councillors and witnesses and guests present to confirm attendance. So I'd be grateful if you can indicate you are present when I say your name. Councillor Wayne Bridges.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Councillor Nicola Brightman.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Councillor Alan Deville.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Councillor Martin Goddard.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Councillor Jazz Dillon.
Councillor Dillon, you're muted.
We can see you.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm just about present.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lindsay Bliss.
Good evening. I'm present.
Thank you. And Councillor Scott Farley.
Good evening, Chair. Present. Thank you.
Thank you. We're also joined this evening by a number of council officers, and I will run through those if you can indicate that you are also present in the meeting. Kevin Byrne, the Head of Health Integration and Voluntary Sector Partnerships.
Yes, good evening, Chairman. Present.
Ian Watters, the Financial Planning Manager.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Helena Webster, Community Engagement and Town Centre Improvements Manager.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Nathan Welsh from Antisocial Behaviour, at the Aspect Service Manager.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Thank you. Jackie Robinson, the Service Manager for Community Safety.
Good evening, Councillor Mills. Yes, I'm present.
Thank you. And from Democratic Services, our officer this evening is Liz Penny.
Good evening, Chairman. I'm present.
Thank you. We're also delighted to have some external witnesses assisting us in some of our reviews and topics this evening. First of all, representing local food banks in attendance in relation to our POX voluntary sector response to the COVID-19 pandemic review. First of all is Diane Fachny, the Food Bank Chair and Centre Director from Bell Farm Christian Centre.
Good evening, I'm present.
And secondly, Tunde Balogan, the Senior Leader of Kingsborough Centre, representing Hillingdon Food Bank.
Good evening, Councillor, I'm present.
Thank you. And then finally, we're also joined by Zubin Reiter, who's the Partnerships Inspector for the West Area BCU in relation to our past review on community safety.
Good evening, Chairman. Present.
Thank you very much, everybody. In terms of technical meeting control, if any councillor leaves the meeting partway through for a period of time, be that a lost connection, the meeting will continue unless we are not quorum, and quorum is 5 councillors. So details of the business to be considered is on the agendas that hopefully everybody has, copies of which are available on YouTube and also underneath the broadcast. So moving to the agenda pack, and agenda item 1, first of all, is apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Vanessa Harangi this evening.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman. Non-pecuniary interest I need to declare in relation to my impending appointment as Cabinet Member for Finance, and therefore I will be absenting myself from the meeting for item number 6.
Thank you. Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chairman. With regards to item 5 on the agenda, I just want to note a non-pecuniary interest in terms of my participation in holding rural councillor surgeries at several food banks before and during and after COVID crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So just in terms of process for that, Councillor Goddard, during item 6, if you will step away from the meeting, we will then make contact with you once that is completed to enable you to return for agenda item 7 and the remainder of the meeting. Agenda item 3 is minutes of our last meeting held on the 4th of November 2020. Does anyone have any comments on those? Otherwise, we will take those as agreed. I don't see anybody indicating, so I'll take those as agreed. Thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is around the exclusion of press and public. All of the items that come before us this evening are part 1 and therefore will be heard in public. Brings us to our main item, or first major item this evening, is agenda item 5, which is our ongoing review into the voluntary sector's response to the COVID-19 pandemic in Hillingdon. And as I mentioned through the roll call, we're very fortunate to be joined by 2 guests this evening and external witnesses who are going to take the opportunity to talk to us as a committee about how it's impacted them and how their organisation in the voluntary sector has worked through this, either themselves or in conjunction with the council and assistance they've received from them as part of the Hillingdon Hub. So I don't know if who would like to go first, between Tunde or Diane. I invite one of you to, Diane, you're going to go first, lovely. I'll invite you to speak, and I'll hand the meeting over to you now, and then we will come back to you with questions from members once you've finished giving your presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting us. I was just, before we started, give a little background of where we were and how we've changed, if that's okay. So I'm from Bell Farm Christian Centre. We are a church, but we're also a registered charity. Our backstory is in the early 1990s, we started doing work within the community to meet needs of things that were happening. We are a church bang smack in the middle of an estate where there was a lot of deprivation, high unemployment, and lots of needs in the community. And so we decided to change the way we worked as the church and actually start to work extensively within the community by doing working in partnership with the local council, the police and other agencies, Groundwork Trust, where we started doing things like employment and training and toy libraries and children's work, and it just grew and grew from there. Just before we went into lockdown back in March, what we were providing at that time was an advice centre called Doorway. It's an advice centre that we set up 20 years ago that's pretty much like a citizen's advice, where we advocate and support people in debt and housing matters and everything. We have been running what's called the West Street and Useley Food Bank, the UB7 Food Bank. We launched that in 2017 officially, in conjunction with other churches in the area to meet the needs of the local community that we were seeing. We knew there was Hillingdon Food Bank, but over our side of the borough, we needed a place where people could locally go over from West Street and Useley and the Heathrow villages. So because that was a need that we were seeing through the Advice Centre, we set up the food bank. We run an older person's dining centre weekly, where we have up to 80 to 100 people come. We provide a hot lunch every week, take them on holiday 2 to 3 times a year, and out on events. This is a lot of vulnerable elderly. We run toddler groups, holiday clubs, parenting classes, many, many different things. But when we went into lockdown in March last year, within a week, we had changed the way we worked, and we were ready to go. within the week of shutdown, we had everything COVID secure. And as the cheers have changed throughout, we've had to reevaluate how we do things when we went into lockdown, then out of lockdown, then back into lockdown. The food bank all through this time, we have remained open. We haven't closed, but we've just done it differently, where the clients have to come to the door, the food is given out at the door, rather than inviting them in and sitting down with us in the advice centre, because we work very holistically. It's not just about food, it's about getting them out of that situation, so that the advice centre and the food bank run hand in hand. So instead of being able to do that, we've kept open the advice centre and we've kept open the food bank by doing the food bank on the door. We'll just take the details very briefly, and we will give the food out through the door. The advice centre, we've been taking numbers, we've done telephone advice. When we came out of lockdown for a while, we set up screens, so we were able to do the advice still. That way, face-to-face but separated and very COVID secure. So that has continued to run all the way through this. The children's work had to change quite drastically because we could no longer do our holiday clubs, we can no longer do our events at Easter, our toddler groups. So what we have done instead is we linked in with people like Hasbro's and that, who were very generous to us and donated hundreds and hundreds of toys and packs that we were able to, particularly in the first few weeks of lockdown when children first started to get bored, we were able to go to the doors and leave with hundreds of parents just bags of toys and crafts that they were able to do at home. We've done Zoom classes with the children. We've taught them first aid with qualified first aiders on Zoom. We have done Christmas parties on Zoom. We have sent packs of crafts made up to their homes, where we have done Zoom crafts together, all of us on Zoom. This is children aged 5 to 11 years old we're talking about. So we've been able to do that. When we came out of the lockdown for a short while in October, we were able to do children's events, but in bubbles of only up to 15. So we fitted in a few events there in the October, and then we went back into the 6 again, so we could no longer do that. So it's gone back to Zooms again. We have been delivering out things to people who are suffering with maybe anxiety, even adults, with craft boxes that they can actually sit and do at home, just to take their mind off a few things. At Christmas, we've given out hundreds of toys and food hampers to families who are struggling at this time. So we actually reopened for a short time our toy library, so people could come and just take toys away like they would in the library, but it's toys, and return them a fortnight later. And again, because it got them out, just even if it was just to come to the door, look through catalogues and go home again. But we've stopped that again because of the lockdown that we've just recently gone into. What we done with the older persons at the start of lockdown, straight away we started delivering food parcels, weekly food parcels to the elderly. And we started doing calls every day to the elderly in the community. And at the same time, we were being referred people from other places. And we were just calling them, making sure they're all right, reassuring them, delivering food parcels. We did speak to the council to make sure we weren't duplicating any services, because we were very aware of what was happening through the council as well, and the hub and that was going on. So we weren't duplicating. We made sure we had close contact with them. We actually been sending out treat bags to the older people weekly, craft bags, crafts to do at home again, because they just were getting so bored. When we had that short break of time where we came out of lockdown and we were able to meet, I think it only lasted a week, we were able to provide that an afternoon tea for the elderly in the community. The numbers were limited. We did they had their own little cubicles we had specially made with it, so nobody, they were all secure in a little box, And that was really good, and we were hoping that was the start of what we can do, but then we went back into only 6 allowed to meet, so we could no longer do that. So again, what do we do now? We decided to start, we then started out sending the parcels, the treats and weekly sweets out again, because there wasn't such a need at this point and for to be getting weekly food. Now, we were really supported massively by the community. When the community started to hear what we were doing, particularly with the older persons and the children, they started saying things on Facebook. The community then set up a Facebook page for us and then gave us control of it. And on that came many, many businesses and furloughed workers who all wanted to work with us. And organisations have been, caterers and everything, donating all this food that we were able to give out to the elderly every single week in the community. And we have hundreds of people on this Facebook page. And so we were able to amass a load of volunteers, particularly people who had been furloughed, who wanted to come and be part of what we were doing, delivering the toys, delivering the food for the elderly, befriending as well, befriending the elderly. We got the children in the schools involved. The children in the local schools were making cards for all the elderly, bringing them to us. They were being delivered. Then the elderly people were sending them back to the children. So it was it's been a really great initiative to bringing the elderly and the young people together. So that's the type of thing we've been doing with the elderly. We have actually got a great relationship with the community, but we've also been greatly supported by the council. Particularly from the grant officer from the London Borough of Hillingdon, and they gave us the flexibility to use the funding as we needed it. For example, to be able to deliver food parcels to the elderly rather than providing a dining centre, which we weren't able to do. So, and we have been really supported through the grants officers at the London Borough of Hillingdon. We've had hotels want to help us, Hasbro. It's just been absolutely awesome what's been happening in the community. It really has drawn them together. We also were able, in the midst of all this, to get a new worker to come and work with us, which we had been advertising at the beginning, and we were able to recruit a new staff member who's called the Director of Product Development, and that gave us the capacity for him to be able to try and fundraise some money. And he was able to get a total of, so far, £45,000 in funding from London Community Foundation, the part of the London Community Response, of which the council is part of that. And that enabled us to pay for PPE and services to be delivered differently and more frequently, and it covered some of our overall costs, as we've had a loss of income through premises rental. So that has been good, being able to do that in the middle of it. There are just so many things that we've changed, but although it's been a hard time, it's also been a really coming together time. We've seen it as drawn a community far and wide together to be working with each other. The food bank obviously has been running in the midst of this, and that has got busier and busier. But again, we get great support from the council with the food bank. And so again, although the numbers are rising, and we're starting to see only the last week or so, people are actually now being made redundant and turning up for the food bank. So all of a sudden, we have people being made redundant just at the drop of a hat. People that's been there 20, 30 years working at the airport are coming and turning up now for food bank. Just all of a sudden. We have had other challenges. Around about September, we started seeing some asylum seekers coming to the Doorway Advice Centre. And also asking for food. And it turned out that because of COVID, a lot of the asylum seekers had been placed just up the road from us. And within few weeks, we're now up to 200 a week, but it's 180 plus families turning up at our centre every single week. And that has been a bit of a challenge to work with these guys, because we're having to provide some food, we're having to provide clothes. Some of them are only just turning on what they stand in. So that's also been a bit of a challenge. But again, the churches right across Hillingdon have come and got on board with us and are helping with that. Churches from Ruislip and Hayes and just all over have all come together to help us with what's happening with the asylum seekers as well, which actually also, these guys also need a lot of support, and it's a privilege to do it. You know, it's hard. Our workers are tired, like a lot of the charities around. People from the charities are working harder and harder, the same as a lot of people, and they're getting tired. But yeah, we've managed to change it, and it's been, you know, it's hard, it's tiring, but there's masses of support we've been able to link into from all the organisations and the council and many other places. The community is just great, wanting to give. So yeah, it's been great. I don't know what I do waffle a bit. I'm sorry.
That's right, Diane. Thank you very much for this very very comprehensive overview of the work that you've been doing. Before we go to questions, I think if we can bring in Tunde now to give you your perspective, which I'm expecting will be somewhat similar. There's probably an element of crossover, but if we can go to you, and then we can come back with questions for both of you. So Diane, if you can mute yourself, and then Tunde, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, and I'd like to say my great appreciation for the invitation to be with you today and to share our thoughts and on how the Hillingdon Food Bank have responded. I want to first of all, of course, say thank you and my gratitude to the leader of the council and also the rest of the councillors for the enormous work that I know is, you're shouldering over the years, and how you have responded to things even before the lockdown and all the pandemic situation. But certainly to this committee for inviting us in response to how COVID has impacted on the community of Hillingdon. Now, my part of it is going to come from the angle of the fact that there can be none of us, and in fact, organizational wise and maybe council wise, who could have said we're very prepared or readily prepared for what the pandemic was going to give to all of us. None of us was perhaps prepared for it, but however, as things unfolded, it became very apparent that what had been going on, what we've been preparing and what we've had in place was going to have a bearing on how we're able to respond. And I must say that the vivid picture of myself and Councillor David Routledge in 2009, when we were rolling the shopping trolley on the aisle of Tesco's supermarket on the high street in Uxbridge, came very vivid as the beginning of our preparation and our response to the COVID pandemic in 2020. Back then in 2009, none of us, of course, knew what was going to go on, but there was a need that there was increasingly becoming necessary to make arrangements for people who were edging into hunger crisis. And that was the beginning of the church where I pastor, the Kingsborough Church, to make plan to start off what became the first food bank in London in 2009. And when we started it then, and since then we've run it with enormous challenges and a lot of different kind of pain, if I could put it that way. However, we have seen the impact and the response of the food bank over this many years, 11 years, as it were, become very confirmed as a needed project that came handy during the pandemic in 2020. Leading on to 2020, there was certainly a growing number of people who needed the project and the need for service of the food bank. But however, by the time we hit 2020, February, March, it was very apparent that the project was going to need to gear in some more energy and some more ways of having to be able to cope. And like Diane mentioned, the need that arose by the beginning of the pandemic was quite very unprecedented for all of us. I remember then that the possible closure of the Hillingdon Food Bank was staring us in the face as at March 2020. And that was because 80% of our volunteers were over 70. And they were the ones who were at the forefront of being vulnerable to the virus. So obeying the instruction for them to shield, within 3-4 days, we lost 80 to 90% of our volunteers, and we became impracticable and unable to operate immediately as the pandemic was unfolding. So we were stared with the possibility of closure. At that point in time, we had about 5,000 food stuff in our stock. And what are we going to do with this? The strategy that we embarked on was to put out a news there that we needed volunteers. We have never had that enormous response from the community. Like Diane mentioned, the community came from different places. Individuals came, families came. In one particular instance, a whole street in Ickenham actually came. They rallied themselves around and came and volunteered at the food bank in response to the call for volunteers, and we're able to raise new set of volunteers that will help us to respond to the COVID challenge. And within 2 weeks, we're able to make sure that every of our premises, including where we have the foodstuff, our main warehouse in Denham, we're able to make that COVID secured. We also were able to make sure that the places where we have all our 9 distribution centers across the borough were also made COVID secured. We make sure that we made everything available so that we can ensure that people who go there were served. However, as things begin to unfold and how things were becoming very much difficult, we found out that being able to get people to come to the centers become more challenging. So we had to then look at what else could we do. And the strategic option that came to us was that we should perhaps consider delivering the food across to people who needed it. And that was where we began to look at the options of actually delivering the food. And just about the same time, we got invited by the council, and I'm glad that one of the people on the call tonight was also one of those who responded with us then, so that we were able to then begin to work together with the council, because the emergency food that was being piloted from the hub in the council, of course, was going to the populace who needed the food. However, when it was necessary for the council to open up back business and then allow its own staff to go back to their normal business in the council, there was a need for someone to take over the operations of the business of the council, and we were invited then. I remember being visited by the deputy council, executive council of the leader, Jean, who came to the council, Jean Palmer, who came to the food bank, and we're able to have a deliberation of how we can take over the operation of the emergency food distribution policy for the council. With Kevin and Jean Palmer, and quite a few other ones were able to get together and then put together a workable plan of how we can get the food to those who needed it, those shielding, those who are elderly, and those who are not able to then make it to the different centers across the borough. The numbers, of course, began to climb up because of how raging the pandemic was becoming very apparent in the community, and when nobody could actually go to work in that sense. I want to salute the contribution and the effort that the council made to support us being able to reach out to those who have been handed over to us, and also those who were able to reach out to. The church that runs the food bank, I mean, we have enormous responses from all the other council, like all the other churches, like Diane mentioned. We function with about 30 churches all across the borough. We have about 35 schools that we work with, where we either collect food or we give out food to people who needed it. We also work with the supermarkets, where we collect on a general basis, but that collection ceased because there were limited people who were able to go to shop at the supermarkets. So we had to now rely on just the trickles of food that comes in, that were dwindling as a matter of days. So we then made representation to the council, and we're glad that we're able to get some support to begin to start buying food for the first time from after the second, I mean, during the middle of the first lockdown. By August, we started to actually go to buy food, because the number of people that we're catering for every week, every day, began to rise. So we had to buy food in bulk. Though donations are still coming in, but because of the enormous weight of those who needed the food, we had to then be able to supplement with buying. Companies, we have relationship with corporate companies, individuals within the communities, and churches, like I mentioned rightly, and all these avenues have contributed to how we're able to make food available to support the people who are needing the food across board within the council. I would say that December 2020, we're also able to make available what we call buckets of joy, which is hampers that we give to families who needed it, and those who were on school vouchers. Their families were presented with some hampers to support them and to make toys and things like that available for the children who needed it at that point in time. So there are quite a whole range of events that we're able to put in place to support those who developed the need for us to support during this pandemic. And we're glad that every day we've seen probably about 15 drivers who come, either individual drivers, bringing their own vehicle, and we check them to make sure that they are COVID certified. We're able to then send them to deliver the food to all the people who needed it. We get a supply of list of need for people that we're going to meet every single day, and we make sure that the food is delivered to them within 24 hours or maximum within 48 hours of us receiving their email for what is going to be delivered to them. So this has been an ongoing experience, and we are sure that with all these arrangements, we're able to certainly certify to continue to cope with the enormous challenge of reaching all those who needed the food. I will just end by mentioning the fact that through this growing operation, the grant department in the council have gladly been able to open up some opportunities for us to be able to cater for incoming expenses that will eventually even come on, but by the reason of us going back into lockdown in the next couple of months. So we're pursuing that and seeing that will come handy to support the further operations of the food bank as we continue in this pandemic. That will be up for now, and then probably during the question and answer, I'll be able to add some more rather than just repeating some of the things that Diane have mentioned about the operation. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Tunde. At this stage, can I just bring Kevin in? Because obviously both of our witnesses have mentioned the coordination from the council and the sort of support that they've gained from us.
Yeah.
Kevin, can you just talk a little bit through around how that worked? Effectively, how did we know about both of these groups, and how was it then? How were they then coordinated alongside others to ensure, I guess, to reflect on the point that Diane made, that we were not duplicating deliveries to people?
Yeah.
On that piece, please.
Yes, no, happy to do that, Councillor Chairman. And apologies, you lost me for a bit. I lost the last bit of what Diane was saying, and probably the beginning of what Pastor Tunde was saying. But I think my internet is working well enough now to be able to answer your question. Yes, no. So what happened around the time at the beginning of the outbreak? You heard at the last meeting that we set up the community hub and how that was resourced with colleagues from Hillingdon for All. We knew at the time that both of the established food banks that you've heard from today were in operation and were still receiving referrals from partners for families who were in need, and they were delivering. So we had conversations early on to understand where they were and what they were doing, and to try and get a feel for the volume they were experiencing. We as if you heard at the last meeting, we set up a system to provide bespoke shopping services for residents, which was part of our crisis response from the council's point of view and part of the hub, and that did include providing emergency food where it was required. And the main reasons for that being done in-house, we did it through the Middlesex suite and using council staff initially, was purely because of the need to scale up very quickly and respond to an immediate response. We were at that stage confronted with the promise of food being delivered through to people who were clinically extremely vulnerable from the NHS, and that took several weeks before any of that came on stream. So we had to fill that gap in the intervening period, and that required scrambling around trying to get food into our distribution hub, which we had, as I say, temporarily in the Middlesex suite. Shortly after that, once we sort of got to a more of a steady state and we were able to deal with that initial crisis and meet the needs of residents as best we can, we were talking along through that period with our established food banks to understand what their needs were and how they were operating. We then, it was at that stage that we needed to, as Tunde said, we needed to redeploy our staff back to their day jobs and basically have a bit of an exit plan for how we could move from to a more steady state and something that's more sustainable. And it was at that stage around August time that we were able to talk to both the food banks you've heard from today, offer some support, financial support, to enable them to buy in food for the first time. The previous model and the traditional model for food banks through the Trussell Trust umbrella, which is the sort of kite mark for food banks, if you like, has been that they thrive on the donations and the goodwill of communities. You've heard that still is the case, very important part of how the food banks operate, as I understand it, and they haven't traditionally received funding directly from any government source. So this was a first, and it's a new model, and it was partly because, as you've heard, during crisis period, the volunteers had fallen away, either because they needed to isolate themselves or because they were concerned. So they needed that help. Also, the donations had reduced because people weren't going out shopping. They weren't delivering donations to food banks in the way that they had traditionally, and that had eased off a bit. There was some money available through the London Community Fund. You heard from Hillingdon for All at the last meeting about how well they had done through that. So there's swings and roundabouts in all of this, but it was certainly a time of significant challenge and crisis. So we've worked with both food banks to try and support them with some temporary money to inject to enable them to be able to buy food themselves and to cover some of the admin expenses. So for the larger food bank at the Hillingdon Food Bank, Tunde's Food Bank, we've also helped with some fridges and with transport costs. And as it says, we are actively considering a grant application under the council's core grant scheme to see whether we might be able to support them through next year, and that's something that's under active consideration. We do, it's probably worth mentioning just to balance that off, we do support Bell Farms Advice Centre through a core grant already, and they get a small grant for the older people's dining centre that they have down at Bell's Farm. So in terms of where we are now, we are referring people who come through to the community hub and have an urgent food need through to the food banks. And we have that referral process underway, and we would like to maintain that and keep that as being used. So the food banks do what food banks are good at, which is to provide emergency food when required, and to work with families or people who come to us and say they have a need, to try and find solutions to some of their problems. I mean, and they can be very complicated and very longer term. But if somebody is waiting for their benefits to be paid, well, then and need some emergency food meanwhile before their universal credit comes on stream or such like, then that's really what the food banks, where I see it, are well placed to be able to help those sorts of people. So the numbers are growing in terms of referrals. I think that they're, I wouldn't say they're on an upward trajectory. I haven't seen data for the last week, and it'd be interesting to see how the latest lockdown has impacted on the data. I'll have a meeting tomorrow where I'll find out a bit more in terms of the numbers we've been referring. But I think it'd be interesting to know if our guests can sort of confirm it. But I would say that they're probably both dealing with at least twice as many people as they were this time a year ago. And some of those needs are more complicated than they were before, because what we're hearing is that the larger sizes of families, so there's a big difference in a food parcel for a couple and a food parcel for a family of 5 or 6. That's a much bigger offer. I think what we've been very pleased with our partners and the way we've worked with them is their flexibility, their way of adapting. You heard from Diane in terms of how they've responded really creatively to working with the clients who come to them, to be able to get out there and make sure people are okay and keeping an eye on them and supporting them with the advice and support. And also how the Hillingdon Food Bank have moved to a model that includes delivery rather than requiring people to turn up at distribution centres, which was the former model. And I think that's been necessary given where we are in terms of lockdown. So I wouldn't say we've got the future model fully agreed yet. I think we still need to see how it goes, frankly. But we have got some resilience now built into that system. And we know what we would do if numbers went a lot higher, and if we had to deal with the prices again. I think we'd know how we could do it, how we could gear up, such like. And what we want to be able to do is to build on those successes so far to make sure what we've got is sort of viable and sustainable moving forward, and that will be our plan for the coming months as we move into hopefully a situation that gets back to whatever the new normal is going to be. So I hope that helps.
Lovely, thank you very much. If I can open this up to members, anyone would like to ask any questions, please indicate, and if you can address whoever you would like to ask that question to.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question, but I can't put my hand up.
Okay, Councillor Bliss, yes. You can go ahead, and we'll go to Councillor Farley after you.
Okay, I just have a question for Diane. I was quite interested to hear about these Zoom meetings for children, during the holidays and Zoom parties. I just wondered if there were a number of children who weren't able to access that because they didn't have the equipment to be able to do so.
Yeah, so for example, at Christmas, we had given out packs for about 54 children, and we had about 36 came. Obviously the rest couldn't access it, but we still gave them the packs. They had to open them at the same time as us, so that they still felt included. But yes, there was a few children that didn't have access to internets or laptops or computers.
That's actually really sad. Is that something that the council could maybe look at helping a bit more with?
Is that to the council?
Sorry, that was a follow-up to you, Diane. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was more that the council could sort of do to help children who are disadvantaged in that way.
Yeah, I mean, well, provide. I'm sure there's possibly schemes out there that may provide equipment that these children can actually have at home to be able to use, like little laptops or iPads or but it does then mean that parents would have to get internet in the home. And if they don't have it, then that's a cost if they can't afford it. That's the only thing.
Okay.
I think Tunji's got his hand up.
Yeah, I'll come to Tunde, and if you had anything in response to this specific question.
Yeah, I was just going to, just give an addition to that. I think this is a prevalent, situation, just the same way that Belfam experienced it, that most of the things that we do within the church and for the food bank and for the community had to migrate onto Zoom, which is the best that we could do. But one of the help that we got from most of the families is that a lot of the families we relate with are professionals who had who are working from home, and perhaps who had laptops and so on and so forth. So they had to share it with their children, but then the problem then got to us to be able to have a conducive time and the best time to fix their parties, their sessions, and so on. So we had difficulty in that. So if like the question asked, if there was a bit of more help that can bring some flexibility to the families to have a bit more avenues to be able to use some resources, it will certainly help more families to join in, and perhaps some of the demographics of children as well in age separation to be able to cope with their own age groups and not model them up in the same and broad range. I think that's what I just want to add to that.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to see some observations I've had before and during lockdown. I have visited the setup in Oxford Road in Denham, and also visited other food banks throughout the borough as well to see how they compare with each other. And what's clear to me is obviously there's clearly a significant difference from the north of the borough as you move through the borough to the south in terms of the need, unfortunately. And visiting the food banks and actually say holding my surgeries there, it's very clear to me that it's a very sad situation that a lot of people are in, and it does upset me, quite frankly, when I leave at the end of a session and see people staggering out the road with bags. So I'm very happy to hear that there is a delivery service in some regards, but I am also aware that there are residents that will travel quite a distance because of, for whatever reason, culturally or whatever, that there's a certain level of shame attached to visiting food banks. I know that people coming from Uxbridge to Hayes, or from Northwood to Hayes, or Hayes to Northwood, so they're covering quite a distance. So that's very good to hear. I am also, with regards to the food bank overall, I mean, it's doing a very good job. It's sad that it needs to be there, but it's doing a very good job. What I'm also looking at is coordination with other entities. So we've got things like the Sikh Gurdwara in Hayes. They've been offering hot meals. We've got the Muslim Centre that's been doing a similar thing during Ramadan to help people out, and the Salvation Army as well has been able to sort of offer hot meals and things during the crisis. So what I'm sort of getting at here is what role really does the food bank see with cooperating with other providers, other entities within the borough, and sort of linking up with them? Because obviously these are things that are sort of more tailored to a different type of need in a sense. And my other question is with regards to the food bank vouchers, in terms of what the definition is of responsible people that are allowed to issue them to those in need. Thank you.
Will I answer part of that, Tundi, and then you can answer part? Okay. As far as the people who give out the vouchers, so basically we have many people that can give out our vouchers. So we have there was people in the civic centre giving them out. Some social workers were giving them out. We have nurses, health visitors, because they go into homes and they see people. We have other agencies give them out, like P3 Navigator, domestic violence. We have many agencies who give out our vouchers. We have I don't know if you know the com.caf. They give them out. Anybody who approaches us and say, can we be a distributor of vouchers? I mean, we wouldn't just give them to anybody, but we would give them to people that we know that work with other people, that work with people in the community, and so sort of know a little bit of the background, and they can make the decision whether they feel that person should have a voucher. We won't question that if it comes from another agency. If they come to us themselves, the actual food bank in West Drayton, and usually because we run in both places, if they come without a voucher, they would definitely be given food without a voucher. But if it was an ongoing thing, they'd be expected to be seen by Doorway, the advice centre. We work very hand in hand so that we can work with the client to get them out of the situation eventually. If that takes a year, that's how long we'll give them vouchers for. We don't stick to a limit of 3 vouchers. We will continue to support a client as long as they need it. And you have to use your wisdom sometimes. But, to be honest, most of the people that come to a food bank are in need. That's how the voucher scheme works. We don't limit it. I know it's not the same on every food bank, but that's in our food bank. We don't limit it. If the client needs it, we will do it. For example, we have in West Drayton, down in the High Street, there was a lot of asylum seekers housed for years down there. And because they can't access public funds, but they do get the NAS money, which is only, £39 now, they need a bit extra support. Now, we have provided food for them over a year, 2 years, just to give them that extra bit of support until they either get the right to remain so they can access public funds or go to work. Because the £39, I've seen the breakdown of what that's meant to buy, and it's absolutely everything, including the prescriptions. So it's not a lot of money. So we do support people. We did start off doing it every week, but then the numbers were growing so large down in West Drayton that we actually says, no, we can only do it every 2 weeks, because otherwise it would just eat up the food bank, wouldn't it? So that's how the voucher system worked for us. I'm not sure how Tundi does his. Probably pretty much the same.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we pretty much do the same. However, we are initially constrained by the trust to trust guideline to say that we cannot necessarily give more than 3 times to each of the people who needed food, because part of what we provide is an assistance of referral to agencies where their situations can be attended to. So the idea is that over a period of 2-3 presentation of vouchers, we'll have been able to identify which departments they can be transferred to or referred to, and there can be an ongoing arrangement to sort them out. However, we've seen situations where after 3 times of voucher presentation, their situations have not been met. We have not cut them off. We have still been able to transfer them to what we call emergency food provisions, where we can then give them emergency food. So they are no more on the general category of our food bank. We continue to give them food. However, it is because of an emergency situation, we categorize them and we continue with them to liaise with how they can be helped. This system has worked for us so well because one of the things we didn't want to find ourselves doing is encouraging people who wants to leave and and get sustained by the food bank, because that is not the essence of the food bank. So we look at it as a temporary arrangement to help people who are ending in situation of maybe crisis, which is temporary for them. So, but however it is, if there are needs for them, especially during the pandemic, we've seen ourselves override this rule to ensure that, and we discussed this with Kevin and the leaders of the council when they came to see us, that if there's a need for us to bypass this rule, we normally bypass it so that we can ensure that everybody, particularly either they're shielding, either they, it's as a result of long-term illness, as a result of one particular situation or the other, they can be attended to, and nobody will be left in cold, without not being attended to. With your other question regarding cooperation with other agencies or organizations within the borough, Hillingdon Food Bank actually have a very wide network of partners that we relate with. Talking about vouchers, those who give out our vouchers, we have about 120 partners who can give our vouchers out to people, and out of this number 120, we have functioning every single day, every single week in, week out, about 70 to 75 of them. And I'm sure that at least about 20 of them are council agencies, council departments who firsthand see people who needed these vouchers the most. They will have screened them, GP surgeries, schools, churches. So these are places where people go on a daily basis, and they encounter the fact that these ones genuinely need the vouchers. So when they are given the vouchers, just like Diane mentioned, we do not query why they have it or what is it that they need it for. We just are able to reach out to them and ensure that we can help them in a situation that can not make them look vulnerable or be put in any very uncomfortable situation. With organization, we also, just like we give the vouchers and respond to people who bring them regardless of their faith, their background, their cultures, or their orientation, we also reach out to organization. You talk about the Muslim Center in Hayes. We have relationship with them. In fact, I'm sure that they have some of our vouchers where they can have vouchers given to people from there, and we can also serve them. But beyond that, we have also reached out to them to say if they're having soup kitchens. We have some soup kitchens that goes on around the borough. We've written to them that if at any point in time you need a support, in the supply of maybe food to cook, maybe pasta or sauces or whatever it is, please do come to us, because there are times where we have loads of this food and we can give some of them. In fact, some of the things that are donated to us, like huge bag of pastas that cannot be given to a family, we cannot divide them into small parts. We just give them to some of these soup kitchens so that they can use them as a big bulk. So we have good relationship, and we have never turned any organization back that we are not able to relate with them at any given point in time. So all across the borough, our 9 distribution centers that span all around the north and south of the borough are meant to bring the centers close to the people that needed them, so that they won't need to travel far. But I do recognize the fact that even with that, our drivers needed to cover, still need to cover at least each of them about 15 to 20 miles every day to reach out to the various people that they are supposed to reach out to and give the food to when they are supposed to be served every single day.
Thank you, Kevin. I saw you indicated. Did you want to come back on that specific question around that item?
I think Tunde's answered the point that I was going to come in and try and clarify on, which was around working with other venues. And I think he's answered.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Dillon, you've indicated as well. You're currently on mute, Councillor Dillon. There you go.
All my good words have gone. I was just going to say, Tunde, Diane, thank you very much for coming, and feel quite humbled to be in your presence. I suppose a thank you as well and to you and your volunteers, possibly on the behalf of the committee, for all the hard work that you've done over the last few months. Tunde, just a quick question for you, and then I've got one for both of you, and then one for Kevin, if I may. Tunde, on your emergency food supply help, how have you seen those numbers grow? Are they growing exponentially or doubling, or how are they growing at the moment?
I mean, to put it in perspective, last year we were able to serve about 7,000, if I can get the number, 7,672 people, which encompasses families, children, and the different demographies. By the end of 2020, the numbers have climbed onto 18,222. So we found out that there have been a massive jump from what it is just a year difference, 12 months difference. So there's a number increase in the number of people that we reach out onto, either with children, with families, and also with people who needed it. And that is as a result of course, the ongoing pandemic situation that we are all dealing with.
Okay, and then thank you for that. And for both of you, Dan, maybe a little bit more your bag, but mental health is obviously a big issue that's going to be on the horizon. As a council, how can we help you guys? You're going to be seeing these people all the time, right? And you're seeing their mental health deteriorate, I'm sure. And a lot of people in desperate situations. As a council, how can we help you with people's mental health, really? Both children that you're seeing in Zoom classes, etc., who will be distressed and confused, and also their parents. I mean, it's a grave situation about to hit, and we need to be proactive on this area. So it's something that, if you could give us some feedback, maybe we can put it into our recommendations.
Yeah. I mean, I will say there has been a rise, particularly in adults, with mental health. We are getting people phoning us up, just stressed, just needing to talk. We have tried by, as you know, what I've said earlier, providing lots of things for them to do and keeping the children as active as we can. We would, I mean, all our staff have trained, believe it or not, during this pandemic in mental health first aid, because, and I think that was recommended by the council, and all our staff trained on that because it was there and we could do it. I think at the moment we're actually talking about, we're re-examining on what we're going to do in light of COVID, because the needs going forward is going to be a lot different to what they were a year ago, aren't they? So we're actually at the moment re-examining our business plan for the way ahead. It doesn't actually answer the question. I think we would need probably more resources to be able to meet all the needs that's going to come from the impact of what's going on and what could continue for, we don't know how long, do we really? How long this is going to go on. And because small charities are actually grassroots charities, they're right there in the centre of all this. I think we're going to need more resources. And one concern is we're really fortunate because of the work we've been doing. And we, as an organisation, have been able to receive an increase this year in our funding from the council. But our concern is in the future, and this is when a lot of the mental health is going to start coming out, that the public finances have been stretched. It's going to be stretched so much with COVID that the lifeline to local charities, it may reduce or disappear. And that's a concern for us. What are we going to do? But I don't know the answers just now. We are sitting down as an organisation, reviewing our business plan, and one of the things we are talking about is the rise in mental health. What can we do to meet this rise in mental health? And so I couldn't give you a total answer just now of what you can do, but I do know there will be things you can do. And I'm quite happy to come back to you when we have got our business plan done and say, right, this is what we feel we can do. Especially, we will continue to work with the community in any way we can. That's what we do as a charity, and we've always done. We will meet the needs in any way we can. But we will certainly need support of the council. But I can't at this point tell you exactly what that's going to look like. And I know that's not really an answer at this point. But, you know, we will come back. But it will be, we will need more resources. We will need help to possibly fundraise to actually get specialist workers in. We probably need councillors coming in and, you know, retraining our children's workers in different ways that can support the needs of these children that are going to come back eventually. Yeah, extreme mental health issues going on here for some of them. I know it's not a 100% answer, I know, but I would come back to you when we actually know more fully what we're going to do.
I think that's fine as an answer. I think there's a general awareness that it's a future challenge that's going to be impacted. I think whilst there is certainly awareness from all parties involved currently, that's obviously a really good initial first step to be able to put something in place. And the fact that, sorry, Councillor, I know you have another question to come, but I think the fact that you as a voluntary sector organisation talk around a business plan is something that probably, I maybe generalise, but 5-10 years ago, a lot of voluntary sector organisations probably didn't have that as such. They relied on volunteers, and they may change from month in, month out, and you do your best to provide what you can. So the fact that you've, and again, both organisations seem to have demonstrated this through the pandemic, that your business operations have improved and your effectiveness as an organisation has become more resilient. I think the fact that you are both now not really in crisis mode like you were when you sort of talked around March time, yet in reality the pandemic situation is pretty much the same. The circumstances that we find ourselves in now are almost identical to what they were in March. It's just that now people are more familiar with it, and you as voluntary sector organisations, as most businesses have, in the private, public sector, voluntary sector, have adapted and now found ways of being able to operate. So whilst it's clearly not a good thing that's happened, it's provided you with opportunities, and through some of the support that the council has given in terms of the coordination and the assistance in sort of the operations and functionality, has provided you with that stability to go forward. Like Councillor Dillon, I know you had a further question.
Then I just wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just add to that, there's possibly that, you know, just an idea for you guys. With so many volunteers, you say you had a great response from various communities, etc. And it's a resource. Resource is often about people. People obviously then involves payments and things and money. But with a large number of volunteers, maybe a training program for these volunteers is essential. And it's got to be a community thing that we've got to try and build that will help everybody through this. Money's not going to be, there's not going to be a huge amount of money around, as we know. There will be some for mental health, I'm sure. The government is well aware of it. But it's how we build something as a community, council and charities going forward to help people through the next phase of what is this pandemic. I know we've learned a lot about in the past, and we have made efficiencies, and we're better at what we were doing now than we were in March. But it's what we do for the future is also that counts. And if we can all do something together to help that. One idea, Mr. Chairman, that I may put to you for a recommendation is that we actually have a case study in Hillingdon People where we demonstrate what we've done, what these charities have done, and what their need is, and how great they've been, but also what their future entails, and how we, you know, if we can get more volunteers on board for the charities, the more people we have involved, it's always going to be beneficial for everybody. Kevin, my only small question for you, it's an easy one, is that when you get that data back on the that you were talking about earlier, and it's so long ago now, I've forgotten what. I've written down data for Kevin. You talked about data on the increase, I think, wasn't it? People visiting food bank.
Increase in food bank usage.
Yeah. Yeah, if you get that, could you share that with the committee members, please?
Yes, I think what we're trying to do is, if it will help you, is to try and get some data from both of the food banks in terms of where the volume has started in all of this and where they are now, so that we've got some sort of metrics to see how things have grown. And what's tended to happen is they've sort of gone up and down. That, you know, when we're in lockdown, obviously the demands and the increase, and the demands, particularly for food, are not always the same. So what we're finding first time round and in fact now is that people are ringing up the community hub because they've been, you know, they're obviously very concerned about the increase in the variants of the virus, etc. And people who are clinically extremely vulnerable are being advised to stay at home now again and shield. So therefore, what we're helping them through with the community hub is to access priority shopping slots in supermarkets and such like, and that's the first point of call. So it's not that. So that's a slightly different question to food for the people who are most in need. You know, like there is a need there, obviously, but it's one we can serve in other ways. So there's a mixture of what needs to be provided for people in here. I mean, if I may, Chairman, can I just respond to a couple of points that came up in Councillor Finley's questions, just to provide some context. I think when we did the original scoping report, and we talk about mental health, it did suggest in there we might invite Hillingdon Mind along to one of these meetings, and I think that would be quite useful in terms of being able to for them to describe their journey over that period of time as demand has increased, and again how they've been supported by the local clinical commissioning group and ourselves through the core grant to be able to respond to that. That might be and I think there may, you know, that feels like an area there may well be recommendations and such like in what to look at. And also it might be worth mentioning, you talk about support for volunteers. We have just before Christmas had agreed a small grant from central government and the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government for us to support through Hillingdon for All a package of training for volunteers in the community to help disseminate messaging around COVID, around vaccinations and such like, so we can make sure that particularly through our faith venues, but through other groups as well, we understand who these groups are and we can get the right messages out to the right people at the right time. And we'll be looking to recruit and train, because we have the funding to do it now, a series of community champions to help do that work. And that will be quick. We need to do it. The funding runs out at the end of March, so basically it's a 3-month project to do that over the next period. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Tunde, I know you indicated, Councillor Farley, you still have a raised hand. I don't know if that's from before or a new one, but I'll go to Tunde first, and then we'll see if there's anyone else.
Yeah, I think with the subject of mental health, I think certainly from our experience at Kingsborough and with the food bank, one of the things we found, we run a nursery that has children, that have parents that come in every day, and of course the food bank as well, where we engage with people. We found that the opportunity to get people into activity, especially outdoor activity within the context of agreed limits of social distancing, is very important. So one of the things that we started to look at immediately in the latter part of last year was to look for an opportunity to get like a life coach into on a voluntary basis. We were able to advertise to look for a life coach who we could engage, and the idea of it was to now be able to get a paid person or a long-term volunteer person to be able to deliver such life coach activity, outdoor activity, some engaging relationship with people, either through Zoom virtual relationship or physical relationship within the context of social distancing when the time permits to do that. That is very important. This is helping us to prepare ahead. And we also have part of our very important area is the source of volunteers for us. Our church is quite actually, and we discussed this with Carla in the council, one of those who are supporting us and helping us out with some of the things we're doing, is that we have a robust team of professionals who either have their own jobs or have their own career and things like that, that are centered around mental health, provision of services and so on, and who have shown interest to be able to support other people, either at the food bank, at the nursery, or in the community as a general role. So we're also engaging that. And with all this, we're just seeing a case where a sort of community effort being put together amongst the people who are able to give the support, and those who have the need can be put together, merged together, to be able to see how we can collectively put at bay the social and mental need for people, so that nobody really sink into some very difficult challenges as time goes on. So all these certainly are in the pipeline and being discussed for a much broader idea that can work and principle that can suffice.
Thank you very much, Tunde. Diana, so you raised your hand as well. Is there something you wish to add?
Yeah, am I on? Yeah. This actually isn't about mental health. It was just something I wanted to mention. At Bell Farm, we, not just us, we would like an advocate, that possibly on behalf of small charities to work, particularly in the future. It's going to be harder and harder to get funding, but we would like something to advocate, work with funders to help cover our core costs, help to upskill us, and all this type of thing. Something like they used to do with halves, which there used to be a halves in this area, didn't there? Council of Voluntary Services, and that finished. But something like that, couldn't that be resurrected to help the small charities in the area?
So on that one, I think Kevin's probably best placed to answer that in terms of the work around the whole voluntary sector, how we coordinate that.
Oh, okay.
It was a point that was raised by Hillingdon for All at the last meeting, in fact, in terms of the what we might call capacity building within voluntary sector, particularly for very smaller groups. What you tend to find is the larger groups who've got a sort of corporate centre or part of a national network are able to call upon that sort of expertise to help them get through this. And what we're seeing is that there are a number of groups now who are really struggling to reinvent themselves and adjust to working in a world where you have to be COVID secure and you 2 meters, and you can't rely on your income from people paying an attendance fee to turn up at your centre and such like. And your volunteers, as we say, are not always there for you. So as part of the grants programme that was agreed by Cabinet in December, because that's happened since your last meeting, that package, that project was agreed, so will be funded for next year through Hillingdon for All to embark upon some of that type of activity. So that's in the programme, and part of that work will be to try and work with other groups to look at that capacity building. It builds on some of the work that they got through City Bridge Trust. You might remember they talked a little bit about that. But what we've been able to do is to work with them to support that through the grants programme. So yeah, that's going to be part of that will kick off in April.
Okay. And just one more thing, if that's all right. I mentioned earlier on about the asylum seekers that we're working with now. 180 plus. All the children, families. So we're talking about a good couple of hundred. We do need support to actually get these children into some sort of education and play, and we're looking to again the council to see if there's any support we could be given for these children and families.
I know that the issue of those asylum seekers, we've talked about it a few times, Diane, in terms of how we can respond to those needs and what challenges are from the Home Office having placed these people there. And I know that my colleagues in children's social care are concerned about some of the issues from a safeguarding point of view, and clearly that's something we need to take that up directly with them about what these issues are and how that support can be delivered. It's a bit beyond my role, I'm afraid, but
okay.
Look, it's certainly understood as being an issue.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, thank you. I don't see anyone else indicating. Tunde, Diane, I guess to echo and build on the comments Councillor Dillon made, thank you very much twofold, really. Firstly, for your attendance here this
Chairman,
evening.
sorry to interject. Did Councillor Goddard want to speak? I think he raised his hand a while ago. Apologies.
Thank you, Liz. No, actually, my question was answered. Thank you very much. But I certainly would like to add my thanks and appreciation to Diane and Tunde for the great work that they're doing. So thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thank you. That's where I was just going to. Just thank you for your contributions tonight and the insight that you provide us, which ultimately helping us in our review of the work that the council does with our partnerships. The information that you've given us around the contributions you've received from the local communities is very positive, and that's good for us as community representatives to hear as well that local people get involved and look out for one another. And then, yeah, finally, thank you for all the work that you do in the communities and help those people who are reliant on these services or struggling in times of need. So thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just say thank you to Kevin. I mean, this is my first time of meeting you. You are the only person in the team of those we're working with that I've not met. But I'm glad meeting you today virtually. But thank you so much for every one of you for all the assistance that you have given to support what we're doing. And we're very kind, and I mean, we're very glad and knowing that certainly the future looks bright and to be able to cope with what's going on. Thank you so much for having us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We'll leave you now.
Thank you. All right.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank
Bye.
you. So we will move to agenda item 6. So Tunde and Diane, as mentioned, you're free to leave the meeting. Kevin, as well, no need for you to hold on. Councillor Goddard, I think we were going to drop you off.
Yeah, that's right. I'll leave now, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. And we will then contact you when we have finished item 6. So which move on to, which is the 2021-2022 budget proposals for the services within the remit of this POC. So Ian, I know you've presented to the POC a number of times previously. So this is the January term, now that the budget has been presented to Cabinet in December. So if you can talk us through the paper, if that's all right.
Of course, thank you, Chairman. Yes, so as you say, this is our sort of second finance update for the year. Back in September, we did more of the sort of scene-setting report in terms of outlining the context in which the budget was being set for the forthcoming year. Following the Cabinet meeting in December, the Cabinet have now agreed a set of budget proposals for the new year, which are out to public consultation. And as part of that consultation process, myself and colleagues from finance will be attending the POCs this month to sort of run through the how those budgets affect the services in each of those areas. So what I was planning on running through briefly, because I think it's quite a long report, so I won't read it out verbatim if unless anyone wants me to, but I'm sure. So what I'll do is I'll give a brief summary of the headlines of the overall budget before just briefly setting out what the proposals mean for the services within the POC's remit. So in terms of those headlines, so the biggest changes we've seen since the update in September is we had the Chancellor's Spending Review 2020 in November, I want to say. I'm sure it's either November, October. Sorry, it's correct in the report, but I've gone blank on my months. Effectively from the spending review, we've seen around £1 million uplift in grant funding for the authority going into the new year, which is good news. The government have added an extra 1% to the social care precept for the new year, specifically to deal with ongoing impacts of the COVID pandemic on those services. And finally, the Chancellor set out a pay freeze in terms of the inflationary element of salaries for public sector employees across the board. That pay freeze, when applied to Hillingdon's pay bill, will be equivalent to around £2 million. So overall, the budget gap, which we had thought stood at 19 million back in September, is down at 16 million following those changes. The Cabinet's budget proposals for the new year follow a similar structure format to previous years. We have just over £8 million of savings proposals set out, which Cabinet have approved and put forward. Those are overwhelmingly efficiency savings, mainly based around transformation of services to make sure we can deliver for residents better, I suppose. The only item in there which is a sort of shift in policy, if that's the way to frame it, is we have a £500,000 saving from winding down the local first-time buyers scheme. So that scheme was supporting around sort of 20 households a year, and actually the government's sort of national Help to Buy and similar schemes actually were doing a lot of the heavy lifting around sort of the home ownership agenda. So this budget proposal, or these budget proposals, include removing that budget. So that's £8 million of the 16 million being delivered through savings. The 4.8% uplift in council tax, so that's the 3% social care precept, including the additional COVID funding, and then a 1.8% increase in the core council tax. So in line with last year, that's pegged to 90% of the expected increases across London. That will raise just short of £6 million towards funding services in the new year. And then the final element to balance off the budget is there's a release of just over £2 million from balances to bridge the remaining gap. The only other sort of headline I just want to drop in there is that obviously the older people's discount for council tax, the value of discounts that households are receiving at the minute will be protected going into the new year, but those discounts won't increase, so the households won't see the council tax frozen. They will see it rise in line with the wider population of the borough. So overall, then that position means that we are less reliant on general balances than we had expected to be in September. So we are expecting to have just short of £28 million of general balances available going forward, which is good news for the council's wider sort of financial resilience and stability. That's comfortably within our recommended range of having 15 to 32 million to deal with exceptional events. Looking beyond 21-22 financial year, the full year effect of the savings that are being implemented in the current year are expected to add another just short of £3 million of efficiencies in future years. And on top of that, it looks like we're going to require another £12.6 million worth of savings in the 2022-23 and 2023-24 financial years, so the subsequent two financial years. See, that is a large number, but we've had a consistent track record in recent years of being able to hit that sort of £6 to £8 million figure for savings. So it's not an impossible target by any means. So that was my sort of headlines in terms of what the budget proposals look like overall. In terms of the services within the committee's particular remit, we have savings, which are mainly around back office efficiencies, given the nature of services that are overseen by the committee. So I suppose the biggest items we've got, the key items we've got in there are a couple of items within the Finance Directorate relating to revenues and benefits, where we're looking at the benefits of automation and robotics to effectively make some of our back office processes just that bit more efficient, and that will enable us to release savings. And then a similar review of the sort of technical administration and business support services within corporate resources is expected to deliver savings. And again, that will build on that sort of robotics automation piece. The last couple of items we've got then in terms of savings are we have we've been taking around £100,000 out of the budget by reviewing effectively our approach to printing, postage and mail, I suppose in the context of the new normal, where officers in the building printing off lots of bits of paper and sort of having letters coming in and out isn't quite the way we're working. And finally, we have a number of savings from zero-based reviews, where effectively we're banking the benefits of sort of underspends and sustainable underspends that have been generated in year. That includes looking at our energy budgets, lease income and business rates. So they're the key items within the savings programme for services within the committee's remit. In terms of new investment, the only specific item in new investment that we've got in there is we've got an uplift in spending on CCTV in the capital programme. And then also in CCTV, we have proposals to bring in charges where, if mainly it's to do with where we have people require footage for insurance claims, say, and it just means that the council can recover the direct costs that we've incurred in effectively providing that footage. So I suppose those really were the key points I wanted to highlight. So I suppose it's back over to you, Chairman, and the committee. If there's any questions I can help with tonight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. I think the CCTVs are a nice one, given that this committee it was covered within our community safety review, and I'm sure we'll hear later from Jackie around how that's been rolled out. I just have a couple of questions, if I can go first, if that's all right, Ian. When we look at the savings targets and the 8 million we're looking to achieve, clearly zero-based budgeting and effective procurement is something that we can be proactive on, and is something that we've repeated for a number of years, and we obviously can continue to do so. I'm just interested in terms of service transformation. I know we have the bid process where we review how the different departments and within the organisation run. How many of these are we now sort of revisiting? Because obviously once we've looked at them once, it's obviously harder to try to get them to transform again. But obviously, depending on the amount of time that's passed, I presume there are technology and maybe software and computer automation that allows some of these things to be revisited and be able to be delivered even better than they could have done maybe 4 or 5 years ago when they were last done. I guess my question is, are we already now at that stage where we are doing a second transformation or review of service to something that's already been probably amended in previous years to be delivered in a more efficient way?
Thank you, Chairman. So yeah, so I think actually the savings that we've got in the current year for both revenues and benefits and for technical administration probably fit that mold exactly. So these are services where they went through quite substantial bid reviews, as you say, actually probably 4 or 5 years ago in terms of the timings. And I suppose all the work then was about the management structures, about how we arrange the departments, and really bringing together areas where there's potential synergies that could be looked at. Whereas what we're looking at now is really we're looking at the business processes there, and as you say, really leveraging in technology where it's now there's scope to to look at a lot of these processes and manage them just that little bit more efficiently.
Okay, thank you. And then obviously with COVID, working practices have probably changed across the council. Are we potentially seeing efficiencies and therefore savings in the way that the council is currently, in existing circumstances, being run, and probably how we foresee it to be in the next 12, 18 months, with which this budget revolves around and talks about?
Cool. Thank you. So so in the current year, we're reporting around a £3 million underspend on our sort of core activity as a council. A significant element of which is linked to effectively the slightly different setup that we're working in at the minute with COVID. The budget for next year, as it's been drafted, isn't sort of predicated on that continuing into the new year. I suppose that's mainly from a sort of risk management point of view. So we do expect, obviously, as long as we have lockdowns, as long as we're dealing with COVID in the way we are, the organisation will be working differently. I think we're also conscious that there's a range of pressures, and sort of thinking about the previous item on the committee's agenda, there's a range of sort of new areas where the council will need to be involved. So I think in terms of COVID, we're assuming that overall the council will be able to secure funding from government to meet the sort of net additional cost of COVID, but across the board there are some ups and downs. And just in case ultimately the government funding doesn't quite cover that, there was £9 million set aside at outturn last year by Cabinet to really just provide a sort of a safety net in terms of managing COVID.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else have any questions for Ian or comments on this? No, I don't see anything. So at the Councillor Farley, yes, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask a few things. First of all, the additional funding for the distributed is welcome. I mean, seen over the COVID period has increased quite significantly. So that's welcome. I wanted to ask 2 questions. One around sort of business rates and Heathrow, and there's some speculation and whatnot in the press and so on about the difficulty that Heathrow's in, also with COVID, how that's impacting on our high streets and so on, and how that translates to the budget proposals and the impact there. And then the other thing I wanted to ask was on going to the CCTV. The sort of the maintenance cover, I was wondering how that has been looked at in context of the suppliers, whether or not, because I know that certainly in my ward, there were cameras that have been out of action for some time because of parts and whatnot that can't be sourced for one reason or another. I was wondering whether the opportunity there has been looked at to make sure that our CCTV cameras are maintained and are doing the job that our residents expect of them. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Councillor. So, so in terms of business rates, so in terms of the sort of I suppose the high street side of business rates, we've got a significant number of sort of reliefs and government funded interventions in the current year, which I would suggest are protecting our income, if that's the way to put it, from COVID. So although there's an impact on the public purse, that's being borne by central government rather than falling on the council. In terms of Heathrow, as it stands at the minute, we're collecting rates from the airport, but obviously aviation is a sector that's been heavily hit, and there hasn't yet been I suppose specific government support for that sector over and above the furlough and the sort of standard setup. So at the minute with the budget, we're assuming that any additional costs or any full loss of income that we see effectively, we'd be able to manage through a combination of sort of central government funding streams as it stands at the minute, and sort of looking at our experience to date in the current year, that's been borne out. But obviously it is a risk. It's we've got a number of very large ratepayers in the south of the borough. I should also say as well, there are sort of safety net mechanisms and things built into the local government funding system. So if you did see any very, very significant swings in income from business rates, a lot of that would be sort of damped for the individual authority. So it wouldn't necessarily all impact on Hillingdon. In terms of the maintenance arrangements on CCTV, I'm afraid it's not an area where I'm sort of up to speed on the detail of exactly how sort of we're running that and how the contracts and the suppliers are set up. So if it's okay, I can sort of take that question back to colleagues and sort of feed something back via Liz if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. You're currently on mute, Councillor Dillon. Sorry.
I just can't get over that today. Just to help, I think the cameras that Councillor Farley is referring to, the older, obsolete ones. So part of the new programme is that we are constantly going to be replacing those old ones that we are sort of transferring around. And those that we can't fix get dumped and are replaced. We keep using a few old ones, but as they become more and more obsolete, we keep replacing them. So eventually we'll have new stock everywhere. It's all digital, etc. So hope that helps.
Can I say thank you? Sorry, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Right. So just in terms of I guess process in terms of the budget report, as Ian said at our February meeting, we will receive comments from all of the other POPs who have had a similar presentation around the budget that impacts their area, and we'll also propose comments from our own POP, which we'll be able to discuss and agree, disagree, amend at our February meeting. But Ian, thank you very much for presenting that to us this evening. That will conclude us on agenda item 6. Thank you.
Chairman, can I just interject just for a second? Can we agree then that the comments on the budget proposals today for this POC can be delegated to yourself and the Labour lead to be put together for the February meeting? Is that okay?
Yes, that's like. I think I will propose them for the February meeting, and then at that meeting, the Labour League can, alongside all councillors, decide whether they're happy with those comments, whether they fully have suggestions, or to amend them or reject them in totality.
Right. Okay, that's absolutely fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair. I'm sure he'll accept them anyway. Liz, are we able to contact Councillor Goddard to bring him back into the meeting?
Yes, of course. Just bear with me 1 second.
Thank you. And then once he's back, we'll be able to move ahead with agenda item 7. Helena, thank you.
Chairman, yes, I've spoken to him. He's just about to rejoin us.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll see him shortly. Fantastic. Thank you very much. So thank you. Agenda item 7, alligating scheme. I'll pass to Helen in a minute. This is an information paper on something that was requested by members at the start of the municipal year back in May. Scheme that probably impacted or benefits a number of wards through the Chrysalis Community Safety Programme. So Helen, I'm grateful for the paper you've put together. If you're able to just talk through this and then we can take questions from members afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, certainly, Chairman, and thank you for inviting us to provide an update on the alligating scheme. Just for context, the team that I manage are responsible for the Town Centre Improvements Initiative and also the Chrysalis programme, which includes the funding for private alligating, and you may also have contact with us through the Wood Budget Initiative and Street Champions, and also the Better Neighbourhood Fund as well. So within the £1 million a year of Chrysalis funding, there is money set aside for community safety schemes, which includes the gating of private alleyways. This scheme was introduced about 15 years ago and has been under our management for about the last 4 or 5 years. Since its introduction, there's about 130 schemes which have been completed in total. For those who aren't familiar with the scheme, Chrysalis funding contributes up to 90% for the cost of gating approved schemes. All the future maintenance and ownership is the responsibility of the residents themselves. So, for example, for the private alligating, the council doesn't keep keys. The council has no right in terms of access for gates on private land. So we help in terms of accessing the funding and actually having the scheme successfully installed. Whilst it's normally residents and private households, businesses are able to apply, and their contribution varies between 50 to 70% depending on the scale and scope of the scheme, and that's a decision taken by the cabinet member. That might apply in terms of areas where residents are living above shops and services, and so depending on the number of residents that would benefit as well, the decisions taken on that basis. And to date, I think there's only one recent scheme where electronic gates are being installed, and again that's because of the commitment in terms of ongoing maintenance, and there needs to be evidence that there's a management company in place who'd be able to take that on. Our report does say that we now do have a framework agreement in place. So we have a one supplier for the alligates, which means that residents no longer have to provide 3 quotations to support their application. And that's part of our ongoing dialogue with residents about their feedback about accessing the scheme and how it can be approved upon as well. As part of the information we provided, there was a copy of the alligating pack as well, but most of the information is online, and that includes a short video with an explanation about how the scheme works and how to apply as well. So I think the private alligating scheme is well known. What might be lesser known is the gating of housing owned land through the Better Neighbourhood Fund. So each year there's 156,000 through Better Neighbourhood funding for improving community improvements on housing owned land, and again that can include gating schemes as well. In terms of those schemes, there's consultation which is undertaken by our team directly with residents to gauge support. And as that is housing owned land, then keys are held by the relevant tenancy management officer as well. In terms of data, we provided historical data, but also some more detailed ward level data for the past 3 years. So in terms of chrysalis over the last 3 financial years, including this year, there's been 23 applications received, 19 of which have been approved, and 4 new applications are being processed. So we're in the process of gaining residents' contributions. And in terms of the private allocating, that's 378 households across the borough who have benefited, with a total cost to the council of 65,366. And we give that as the average contribution for the council per household is £173, and the average contribution from each household themselves is £23. We thought it was interesting in terms of the Better Neighbourhood Fund data, that in fact a comparable cost has been invested by the council over the last 3 years, supporting 14 Better Neighbourhood funded, so housing owned schemes, of which 311 households have benefited as well. There were, I think, 3 specific questions which the chair had asked, which have been addressed within the report. So there's a question about the ongoing maintenance of alligates, which, as we say, in terms of private alligating, that is the responsibility of the residents themselves. So it's very much seen as a self-help scheme for residents who are responsible in terms of the not just making the application, but making sure that the gates are used as they are intended, and also having the resources to pay for any further maintenance once the 12-month guarantee has expired as well. We were asked how new residents who move in are made aware of the scheme, and there we've said that in terms of the private alligating, that would be the responsibility of the previous owner. Where residents have made contact with us because they haven't been provided with the key, we can advise them either to speak to other neighbours who would be able to assist, or we can ask the lead resident or deputy lead to contact them directly so that a master key can be cut. We were also asked about the interaction with estate agents around schemes that are live. There's no formal interaction with estate agents, but we have said that occasionally if there's been difficulty in contacting private landlords, then we have been able to do that through the letting agents, and we have asked them for their assistance where it's needed as well. In terms of the current status, it has been a very popular scheme. Many of the more straightforward gating schemes have already been implemented. So as we progress, quite often the schemes get more complex. But also we're looking at continuous improvement. So we always ask residents for their feedback once they've accessed the scheme. And the kind of things that we're looking at, for example, in terms of improvement, is that at the moment, the collection of residents' contributions, the lead resident would be either obtaining cash for which they'd give receipts or cheques, and whether there's a going forward, if there's a more accessible way of gaining these contributions that could help in terms of the scheme as well. I think that's probably a very brief summary of the overall report, and then obviously I can answer any and help with any other inquiries that the councillors may have.
Yes, thank you very much. I've seen a couple of hands raised. So first we'll come to Councillor Bridges and then Councillor Goddard.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd just like to begin by saying that the scheme is fantastic. It is a great scheme for residents, and many residents have benefited from the scheme. However, the scheme now is some 15 years old, and for those who started this in the beginning, whilst it was a very good scheme at the time, 15 years on, I think some cracks may start to appear in terms of the ownership and the management of this scheme. I do fully understand that once these alleyways are gated, it is the responsibility of residents. However, with a change in private rented sector along many communities, including mine, the ownership and the lead residents of those alleyways becomes sometimes lost and misplaced. For example, in one of my wards in particular, I've had some where they've got a bank account for the maintenance fees. However, they can't access the bank because the lead owner of that has gone and not passed on the details. So I certainly think on our part as a council, we could and perhaps should be doing more by way of maintaining our records as to who has the keys. Maybe it is worth keeping a set of keys as a council to intervene when these problems do arise. But I think certainly keeping better records may be a way to help residents when these problems do arise. They are few and far between, but I think it is something we should look at.
Thank you, Councillor Bridges. That's very helpful feedback. What we were looking at is that I think you're right that we could be more proactive in terms of writing out to the lead residents, at least on a yearly basis, just to make sure that the contact details are still correct, and also if they want to update in terms of a deputy lead resident as well. So I think that could ensure that that the keeping of the key contacts is more accurate in case there's any problems going forward as well.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard.
Thank you, Chairman. The angle with this that I was interested in actually was whether your team has any sort of dialogue with the police and with the ASBET team, just in terms of feedback from them in terms of the effectiveness of the scheme, and in particular whether there are occasions when you receive recommendations from them in terms of alleyways that should be gated.
Yes, Councillor Goddard. In fact, the police, as part of their visits, the Safer Neighbourhood team often recommend to possibly to victims of burglary that they contact us about alley gating. So we do get a number of referrals through this Safer Neighbourhood team, and we also work closely with ASBET as well. When residents are experiencing antisocial behaviour and our team are made aware of it, we always suggest that that's reported through the contact centre, so that a more accurate picture of the scale and the nature of the antisocial behaviour can be built up as well.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask, I know you answered this question in the pack around some of the bits that I probably raised in advance. I guess my question or suggestion more is around the possibility around advising estate agent of this whole concept and principle. I would have thought that if an estate agent has been around the area long enough, they would have probably sold some houses that have alley gates now, but wondered whether there was an opportunity for us to write to them, give them a briefing on the whole, to advise them of the alley gates and how they work, just so they're aware in case any potential buyers ask them. And I would have thought it would be a positive selling point on a property that they have this as well. I guess just in linking to the responsibility of the previous owners handing over the key during the housing transaction, it's unlikely in the majority of circumstances that the buyer and seller meet on moving day, so the chances of them handing over the key is unlikely. Therefore, I think if the estate agent has a level of involvement or awareness of it, that transition is potentially more likely to happen. And I guess linked to this, I know the council, and this may be a separate department, I appreciate, but I think we have a landlord forum, or there's certainly previous presentations that are done to private sector landlords within the borough. Whether this has or is included as a topic for them to be aware of as well.
Thank you for that, Councillor Goddard. Those are both very useful suggestions. We are often in contact with estate agents in terms of the town centre initiatives, where quite often to let or for sale boards are remain on properties far after they've the transaction's been completed. So I think it's a really helpful suggestion that we could be approaching estate agents with on a positive footing as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. Helena, do you know if when property searches are done on the purchase of a property, it shows up in the solicitor's information, so they'd know that they were buying into an allocated area? It's on a similar vein to the estate agents, but perhaps it could be formalised somehow.
No, as far as I'm aware, and from our because our team have access to land registry searches, which we often are able to use to support residents. The registry search would give ownership, so it would show the title and the ownership of a particular piece of land. It wouldn't show any additions to that, which the gating scheme would be.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anyone else indicating with a question or comment. So thank you very much for that presentation. Certainly useful information. 15 years is longer than I thought the scheme had been in place, and it's good that there are still new proposals coming forward, because you'd have thought that a lot of areas, if it would have already had it in place, but it's keen that the news obviously is still spreading around different parts of the borough where they may be looking to react to crime or antisocial behaviour. But thank you very much for that. And if those suggestions that members have made can be taken back and discussed internally, see whether there are opportunities for future improvements, that would be much appreciated as well. Councillor Dillon, did you want to come in quickly? Sorry.
There you go. I believe Councillor Bliss would like to answer a question. She's just texted me.
Yes, Councillor Bliss, you can. You are currently on mute. I'm not sure if that's something you've done yourself or has.
I did. Yes, sorry, Chairman. I did mute somebody because there was a bit of rustling going on. But it's just *6 on your phone to unmute yourself. So just *6, and you should be able to unmute yourself.
There we go. That's worked. Okay, Councillor Bliss, go ahead. You appear to be unmuted, but we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, there we go. That's better.
Yes,
Please
we
go
can.
ahead.
Yes,
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been involved in an allocating scheme quite recently, and one of the biggest issues that we had was the absentee landlords. Now, when it's sort of 40% of the households who you can't get in touch with to actually get the contributions from, it does make things very difficult. And I just wondered if the council had a way forward on this.
No, I do know that we did ask the cabinet member for his view on this, and I think because the percentage 40% of absent landlords or people actually participating within the scheme is quite significantly high. What that seemed to alert us to was if that many members of the scheme weren't actually participating, how well the allogates would the allogates actually be used as they're designed. So would there be some significant support to actually make sure that the gates were closed as intended? But anything like this, we always take on a case by case basis as well, and prepare a briefing note for the cabinet member to take a view as well.
Yeah, thank you. Can I just follow that up? I mean, I just wondered how many schemes have fallen because of the amount of absent landlords not taking part.
I think we've in the figures that we provided for the last 3 years, we showed the number of inquiries received and those that were progressing, and it's actually really it's quite a number of applications. Inquiries do proceed to a full application as well. The information for that is on the spreadsheet which accompanied the report, but I think we can't make any assumptions, and I think as you've alerted us to this, I think it's something that we do need to keep a careful and watchful eye on to see if this is something that is progressing, so that if it is, that can be a different way of approaching it can be looked at as well.
Okay, thank you. Can I just say lastly how good your team is at helping with these schemes? They're absolutely brilliant.
Oh, thank you. That's I'll certainly pass on that positive feedback. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bridges. You wish to ask something further?
The mute button. What a pain that is. Just a quick question for clarity on the BHF funding. Does the council still maintain the land in question once that's gated, or is that also owned by the tenants themselves once it's been funded?
No, that continues to be owned. That remains as housing owned land. And we would say if any of the councillors want to know more information about the Better Neighbourhood Fund, I know Councillor Farley is familiar with the scheme, but there is information on the council website, and we have started to publicise this within Hillingdon People as well. But until it came under our management, it did seem to be a somewhat perhaps underutilised scheme, and this funding can be really useful, as well as allocating other community initiatives to improve the neighbourhood as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Helena, for that very, very useful information. Thank you.
Thank you. And will it be okay if I leave now, Chair?
Absolutely, yes, sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so that brings us on to agenda item 8, which is to have a little look at the antisocial behaviour in lockdown. I just want to caveat this item before we get too far into it. I know this was something we requested at the start of the year to look at, almost combined with the work we were doing around the COVID situation, to understand how ASB have been impacted and the increase in work or cases for that. And I know there were specifics, Councillor Dill, I know you had in particular. I just want to be clear, though, that ASB is not something that specifically comes under the terms of reference of this committee. So I believe that it would come under the Residents, Education and Environment POC. But we are able to sort of stretch work around in terms of the COVID situation to understand the impact of this. But what we're not going to be able to get into is a full review of the whole antisocial behaviour team and ASB operations. But in terms of the scope that we have for this, we can certainly proceed. So Nathan, thank you very much for joining us tonight and for the paper that you prepared in advance and circulated to members around the number of cases that you've had and the appendixes that are aligned to that. Gravely, if you can just talk this through and give us a high level of the paper, if that's all right, before we take questions from members.
Yeah, okay, Chair. Obviously, in terms of the COVID response, we've had to work in partnership with licensing and the police, and that's not obviously anything that would naturally be part of our remit, but we have 4 dedicated officers who have delegated powers underneath the COVID Emergency Powers Act. They're currently working 7 days a week, 12-hour shifts, to enforce on the business front and the nighttime economy with regard to breaches of social distancing in conjunction with the police, or businesses not adhering to any of the restrictions, or businesses that shouldn't be open being open. In terms of the increase in workload or cases, that's a little bit more around what we would expect in terms of a lockdown. It was noise, because more people are at home, more people are making noise. There's more people there to witness that noise. Rubbish accumulation, misuse of communal areas, and neighbourhood disputes. But that's all because everybody's at home. So they would be expected during the pandemic. Now we're almost 10, 11 months into it. We've become quite expert at dealing with it. In terms of, it would probably be easier, Chairman, if I could just take questions, because I'm not sure what it is you want to know other than what I've provided. I mean, the figures are there. I would assume everybody has read those. But I can take more specifics really through questions about what we've done and how we've adapted to dealing with COVID. I can say that the ASB team has, where possible in keeping with government guidelines and restrictions, continued to deliver a service throughout the entire pandemic. Officers continue to work, continue to make visits, continue to do their daily duties in keeping with government restrictions.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for that. So yeah, I think, look, as you said, that there's a lot of information included within the pack, which has made significant changes in year-on-year numbers. So happy for members to ask questions around this or other questions that they may have had for you. Councillor Bridges, I saw you indicated if you'd like to ask first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just on the stats in the reports, I assume they're just the numbers of issues reported. What I can't find in the report is any FPNs, fixed penalty notices, in specific. I appreciate it may not necessarily be relevant to this POC, but specifically during lockdown, it might be useful if I could see how many fixed penalty notices were issued.
Councillor, are you referring to fixed penalty notice issued for breaches of COVID or fixed penalty notices in general?
So COVID related. So noise, I would assume, would be one. Anything relevant to COVID.
No, noise wouldn't be a fixed penalty notice. That would be dealt with as we would do normally in terms of noise. The fixed penalty notices I will get off of Stephanie Waterford, who is heading that up and who I work with around businesses and what's been issued under COVID.
So would noise also include parties and breach of lockdown rules?
That would be the police who would attend to deal with that and issue the fixed penalty notice. So I'll have to get onto the police for that. We wouldn't have the powers to break that up as ASB officers. And I don't know how many parties the police have broken up within the borough. But again, I can speak to Stephanie and we can get those figures for you.
It'd be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask the COVID marshals. Did they come under your team or working with your team?
They don't work directly with my team. My team work with the police and licensing officers. In terms of the COVID marshals, I've not had any direct input with that, Councillor. That again is Stephanie Waterford.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dillon.
Nathan, hi, I hope you're well. This is a good report. It's actually left me a little bit speechless because I had a load of questions, but the information's all here, so I don't really have much to ask you. It's just
I'll rejoice in that, Councillor.
Yeah, no, this is I appreciate it. I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, good night. I think that's a pretty successful outcome, right? If we've asked for information on something and the report covers it, that seems a pretty successful approach that we've gone through here, and obviously makes your evening slightly easier, Nathan, in terms of not too many questions.
Absolutely.
If everyone's happy with that, then we can note the contents of the report and thank you for providing.
No problem. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Chairman.
Just before we head, sorry, Councillor Farley, I see you've indicated.
Sorry, thank you very much. For instance, if there were sort of hotspots, obviously town centres and whatnot, and high streets and that sort of thing. I mean, I'm sort of looking where we've actually had particular issues that have repeat offenders. Should we call them?
So we had some issues in Ruislip High Street. I think we've had issues all over the borough. I think it's probably easier to describe the businesses that repeat offend, because there are car washes are repeat offenders, vape shops are repeat offenders. There's takeaways are repeat offenders in terms of not managing social distancing, not having their staff wear face masks, not enforcing people coming in to wear face masks. So takeaways, car washes, vape shops tend to are predominantly repeat offences or businesses that repeat offend. I don't know why vape shops and car washes are so popular during a pandemic. It leaves me baffled. Takeaways, I understand that to some extent, but that isn't that they're breaching the rules of what they're allowed to do. It's just that they're not managing social distancing and they're not managing the wearing of face masks. And I think our biggest problem actually isn't businesses en masse breaching, trying to make a living. It is people not social distancing when they should, and it is people not wearing face masks when they should. The other problem we have in terms of outdoor, because there is no law currently that says you need to wear a mask outdoors, you only need to wear it indoors. Our parks, our skate parks, people congregate. They may go there just as their bubble, but the social distancing doesn't exist. People aren't wearing face masks. They're getting very close to each other. They're then obviously going back to their homes or going back into shops. And I think that isn't helping currently, but that restriction wise, you're allowed to go to a park, you're allowed to go to a skate park. So I think some of it, some of the central advice is counterintuitive to some extent, or allows people still to mix in groups that possibly they shouldn't do, indirectly possibly as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. You wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nathan, just following on from that. So a lot of the issue that you just mentioned there are not under your remit, but seem to be under Stephanie's remit. How often are you two guys getting together to go over that stuff? Because it seems like you seem quite knowledgeable upon where the issues are. And I'm sure Stephanie is, because I've worked with Stephanie before on licensing, but shouldn't the two be hand in hand? And
I can reassure you that they are. I talk to Stephanie more than I talk to my family members. I talk to her countless times a day, email countless times a day, join everything up. We are working with her manager, Daniel, conducting and organising joint patrols with the police, ASB team. There's rotas, there's spreadsheets, there's Excel documents, there's emails, there's telephone calls, en masse.
Right, thank you. And what can we as a committee do to try and make your lives easier? Because obviously what we're seeing as councillors and what we're being told by residents is that there's very little social distancing going on, very little in terms of masks being worn in places. Besides reporting, what can we as a committee do and take to somebody to help you guys? Because clearly the situation isn't improving anywhere. We're going to be in it for a few more months yet, and resources are stretched everywhere.
They are, I think, without sounding too egotistical, I think we've got everything we possibly can have in place. We've got the joint patrols with the police. We've got the enforcement action. We're issuing warnings. Fixed penalty notices are getting issued. We're got my 4 officers working 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. I just think it's a message that has to go out to various parts of the population. The government's trying to do that. We know there's a small part of the population that are breaching. You see the supermarkets are now getting behind it with the masks. That's incredibly encouraging, because I'm sure we've all been in supermarkets and seen people just walking around without masks on. But again, you have staff in there without masks on, so it all gets a little confusing. But they've all joined that. I think that will help. I think that will help push the message. In terms of what we can do as an authority and what you can do as councillors, I think we're doing everything that we possibly can within the powers that we have and the resources that we have. I don't think there's anything more we could do. The one thing I would ask is that my 4 officers have worked every single lockdown and put themselves at risk daily, and I would like that recognised for those 4 officers at the end of this. Those 4 officers specifically, because they have worked every single lockdown and put themselves at risk, and I think that's commendable.
Thanks, Nathan. I think our chairman will echo my thoughts, but I'll let him finish on that one. I'm sure he knows what I'm going to go with that.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, no objection to that. I think it's across the council that we as councillors recognise there are many officers going above and beyond what their normal duties would have been in normal circumstances. Like you say, particularly highlighting being out and about in these circumstances does expose people to additional risk, and that's certainly something that we all acknowledge. Councillor Farley, I'll just check with you. You have a hand raised. Is that a previous hand or a new one?
Thank you, Chairman. Just go back to the engagement with the offenders.
Yeah.
So obviously, it sounds like in most cases, they are with what you've got to do them once or twice, and then they get the message. I want to know generally how receptive those offenders are to guidance, or how your officers are able to engage with them and sort of encourage them to behave in the right way. I mean, we're hearing obviously with these issues now with shops and the challenges that they have themselves, and obviously you pointed out as well, that they have with getting people to wear masks and so on and so forth. I'm sort of wondering generally, other than the sort of outliers, how receptive and those people and those businesses are.
They're reasonably receptive. My officers stay on site if they shouldn't be open until they close, so they don't have a choice. We don't say you need to close and then we walk away. We wait till they've closed, and then we will follow up within a day or two for a second visit, and then if they are open again, that's when we'll go down the fixed penalty notice route and feed all that information centrally into Steph's team, where the FPNs and etc. are farmed out. But invariably, they comply once they've been caught, and then we will follow that up with repeat visits to make sure they're not reopening. And that's worked with most of the car washes. I don't think we've had any open this week. But we're also sympathetic and understand that these businesses are struggling. They're losing money. It's a hard time for everybody. But yeah, the officers stay on site until the premises are closed.
Thank you, and well done to your team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. I don't see anyone else indicating with any further questions, so happy to close that item. Nathan, thank you again, and please pass your thanks back to the team on behalf of the committee.
I will do, Chairman, and thank you, councillors, and all stay safe.
Thank you, Nathan. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. So this brings us to agenda item 9, the last sort of update for tonight's meeting. This is an update on our local policing review that we've carried out throughout 2018, 2019. A number of recommendations that this committee made went to Cabinet in July 2019, so it's 18 months ago now. Jackie kindly joins us this evening, having sort of led us through the review from an officer perspective when we carried that out as a committee. Through the papers that we've got this evening, you can see the progress that's been made across all of those recommendations. Jackie, I don't know if there's anything you'd like to speak on around this. You're currently on mute, so I think on the phone it's *6 if you are able to unmute yourself. But it would be useful for the committee to understand how these recommendations have been implemented, and also what the outcomes and delivery of these have achieved for us as a council, and obviously the wider community in terms of a safety perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Mills. You'll see the recommendations in front of you, and as Councillor Mills has already said, there have been or there has been progress made. We've also got Inspector Zubin Reiter on the call as well, who, since we had our POC review before, is the new partnership inspector. So there have been a number of changes. We've gone down from 2 police teams at the council fund to 1. I don't know whether you want to hear from Zubin first to get his perspective on things, but I think the situation that we find ourselves in with COVID, when it initially started with the first lockdown in March, I don't think anybody anticipated that it would probably go on for this long. But actually, I don't see it as a negative. I see it as a positive, because it's given us the opportunity to regroup and look at the way we're delivering some of our services, to see how we can deliver them in a different way and how they can be delivered perhaps more efficiently. So work continues, but we are just doing it in a slightly different way. And perhaps an example of that is the White Ribbon Conference that we do annually, which is it's to recognise the International Day for the Eradication of Violence Against Women, normally held on the 25th of November. Well, for the first year, we held on the 26th of November, and it was done through Teams, and it still proved very successful. So something else we were able to do, which Councillor Farley will know all about, was normally we had an entertainer who provided the entertainment, and at the end of it, myself and another member of my staff were able to go out and to deliver presents to victim survivors and their children, which I know they felt really grateful for, that we were able to still provide this service. So we are still carrying on, but as I say, we're just doing things in a slightly different way.
Thank you very much, Jackie. 3 parts, if you can pick up on, if that's all right, just in a little bit more detail. One of them is one that you alluded to, possibly including Zubin around the tasking team, around how that's operating twofold. Firstly, now that we have 1 tasking team as opposed to 2 in the borough, are we still able to dedicate those resources to areas that we need to, and how has COVID driven that? Secondly, around CCTV, the rollout program of that, can you update how that's progressing? And thirdly, the CCTV control room, something that a number of members got to visit and were impressed by. How is that currently operating in the current circumstances as well?
Okay, so if I start with CCTV first then, we have been quite fortunate that throughout the pandemic, we have in general been able to maintain a 24/7 service, which is good news. We do keep an eye on things within the CCTV room regarding staff wearing PPE, making sure the room is clean twice a day and things like that. So we're quite sure that there are sufficient measures put in place. But as I say, we have been providing that service throughout the pandemic 24/7. The progress of the CCTV is continuing. With the upgrades, we now have, and you'll see from the recommendations, we now have 19 ANPR cameras which are situated around the borough. Obviously, we don't publish where they are, but we are using those on a daily basis, where we are receiving information both from the police. It may be we're getting details from the antisocial behaviour team regarding vehicles that are fly tipping. or where CCTV operatives are actually picking up suspect vehicles. So we are using the ANPR cameras on a very regular basis. And I think moving forward, one of our priorities, if we could, would be to ensure that we had ANPR cameras on all our main arterial routes, both in and out of the borough. I don't know whether you want to ask me anything in relation to the CCTV at this stage before I go on to the partnership tasking team.
Just a quick one. I know when we did the review, there was talk around some police presence potentially where people were not able to be out and about, active officers, that they had a ability to work from the CCTV control room. Has that been implemented at all?
Yes, I mean, I would say that we have a very, very good and tight relationship with the police regarding an information flow, if you like, coming in and out of the CCTV room. But we also encourage officers who are perhaps on restricted duties to use the CCTV room itself. So yes, we do have officers coming in, but then we're also able to help and have provided help for some quite serious offences. So we have provided information to murder squads, the flying squad, and things like that. So there is a lot of interaction going on with the police.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone have any questions on CCTV before we go to the tasking squad? No, so fine. Jackie, I think that one's, if you can just, an update on the tasking team, how they're now operating.
Okay, so when we did the POC, we had, or the first policy overview review, we had 2 sergeants and 13 constables. So we had 2 teams. But with the introduction of the new funding arrangements, since the 1st of April, we've had 1 sergeant and 8 constables. Zubin, who's on the call, is their direct line manager. But I'm more than happy with the relationship we have. I speak to Zubin on a daily basis. We email, we send text messages about anything of any significance, or if we need things doing. So I think that's quite good. We have fortnightly tasking meetings with the sergeant in charge, Gareth Blackburn, who's in charge of the partnership tasking team. And we invite various departments within the council, such as licensing, planning, trading standards, corporate fraud, ASBIT, tenancy management. Anybody who would like the assistance of the partnership tasking team can come along and present whatever their particular case is. And I know recently the tasking team have helped out with trading standards on visiting various premises for counterfeit tobacco. They've also assisted the tenancy management team. So there is a lot of interaction going on with the partnership tasking team. So nothing really has changed very much at all. I can contact Gareth, I can speak to Zubin, and I do. And I say then other officers have the opportunity to request their assistance if they so wish.
Okay, thank you. I think from a committee, I think that's fine. From a committee perspective, I think it's obviously pleasing to see that the recommendations we put together, proposed, recommended, were not only approved by Cabinet, but have then been successfully implemented by yourself across the team. So thank you very much for firstly doing that, and also for the update that you've provided around that. I don't see anyone else.
I think the only thing I would say in relation to that, obviously, with there only being 1 partnership team, it isn't quite the same as having 2. although we haven't really noticed much of a difference because that came into effect during the first lockdown. So when things perhaps go into normal, we might, back into whatever normal is going to be, we might notice a difference. But I have to say, it hasn't really had an impact because I think the relationship that I have with Zubin is such that even if the partnership tasking team aren't on duty, so whereas when we had two teams, when one team was off, the other one would be on duty, I know that I can contact Zubin and say, there is this problem. I know the partnership team aren't working. Have you got anybody else who can assist? So Zubin and I have got an appointment for next week when we're going to get together to look, because resources are diminished on both sides, if you like. So we have an appointment scheduled between us where we can discuss and talk about how we can work even closer in partnership. So we'll see how that pans out.
Excellent, thank you. Just one, conscious of time, just one final point from me. Just to clarify, the tasking team, they are completely ring-fenced to us in Hillingdon, is that right?
Yes, they
I
are.
don't know whether you want to answer that, but
Yeah, so they're completely ring-fenced to Hillingdon. I don't let them go over. They don't do any cross-border work with the rest of the West area. However, in terms of, they can be used in scenarios of extremists. Things like that would be major protests up in central London, or New Year's Eve, or something of such ilk. But otherwise, they're tasked to Hillingdon. They're only tasked to Hillingdon, and they'll only be tasked by either myself or Jackie.
Lovely, thank you for confirming that. Okay, thank you very much both for that. Happy to note those that update from you on the review that was carried out. So thank you. Now I will move to agenda item 10, which is the forward plan. Which we've been upgraded to A3, so hopefully everyone's had a chance to read this. Anyone have any questions or comments they wish to make on the forward plan, or are we happy to note that?
Chairman, can the previous two speakers be permitted to leave?
Yes, if it's up to them. Yes, they're more than welcome to leave.
thank you very much, Councillor Mills. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't see anyone indicating around forward plan, so we're happy to note that. Thank you. And then that will then take us to agenda item 11, which is our work programme. All the forthcoming meetings, unfortunately, are virtual, as you will obviously be aware. So our next meeting will be the 3rd of February, scheduled for. As we mentioned, cabinet budget proposals is back, and we are more of a property focus alongside for the noting items. Next time on the safety, we have council-owned buildings and information on Hillingdon First Limited, as well as our further potentially final witness session on our major review. Unless anyone has any questions, we're happy to note that. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time this evening and contributions. Happy to close the meeting and wish you a good evening.
Okay, if you could all just remain on mute just for a moment, councillors, just while I stop the streaming, please. Thank you.